Thank you so much. Thank you to the Alzheimer's Association and everyone who's here. This is truly my privilege to be here. And the Alzheimer's Association has been a supporter of the book from the beginning. So how did this begin? My Nana had Alzheimer's, and I was in my 20s, and I was a neuroscientist. I used to do brain research. I used to do research at the NIH. I was here in 1996. But I didn't do research on Alzheimer's. I researched the molecular neurobiology of drug addiction. So I did a lot of reading when my Nana had Alzheimer's, and I learned about the molecular neurobiology of Alzheimer's, and I learned about what caregivers go through, and I learned about how to be a better caregiver and pass that information along to my Aunt Mary, who's here, who sold her house and quit her job and was her full-time caregiver for almost 4 years. But what I didn't learn, and because we were like a lot of families in that we missed the beginning of my grandmother's Alzheimer's because we assumed that her forgetting was a normal part of normal aging, I missed the opportunity to be able to ask my grandmother what it feels like to have Alzheimer's. And that's the piece of information that was missing in all of the resources that I read. Everything was written by a clinician or a scientist or a caregiver or a social worker, and while that was all really useful information, what I really wanted to understand was my grandmother as her granddaughter and not a neuroscientist or a caregiver even. What does it feel like? That question was the seed for this book that I would write. And so, as Wolf explained, I wrote the book, and then I sent out the query letters to literary agents who are supposed to then represent you to then find a publisher, and I sent out 100 of those. I'm still waiting to hear back from But I did hear back, actually, it was a universal no, pretty much, but I did hear back from 4 agents who wanted to read the manuscript, and the response was, Alzheimer's is too scary. It's too depressing. I don't think people are going to want to read about this. And so I get that. I get that Alzheimer's is scary, and it's depressing, and it's heartbreaking, and it's tragic. And yet 5.2 million Americans have this, and they have people who love them. And it's important to understand the neurobiology, and it's important to understand how to be caregivers, especially in the absence of a cure. But it's also important to understand what it feels like, because if we can understand what it feels like, then we can stay connected to our loved ones for as long as possible, despite them not remembering us or maybe losing language and memory and cognition skills. How do you stay connected? What does it feel like? And so I did. I self-published the book in 2007, and I sold it out of the trunk of my car for 10 months. And the Alzheimer's Association was one of the first groups to champion this story and invited me here in 2008. I came with my little self-published book that was, literally I took a few copies from the trunk of my car and brought them to DC. And I spoke here at I believe it was the first early stage advisory committee forum. And I read some passages and we spoke, and there was a panel of people that I'd come to know. And I met Elizabeth Gelfand-Stearns, who read the book in one night and called me soon after saying, we need to make this into a movie. And it's been a long, strange road. But the movie happened, and the book happened. Simon & Schuster published the book and took it out of the trunk of my car, thank God. Because I don't know how to sell my book to Brazil. But they do. And then the same thing with the movie, my film agent said, okay, so you've got a drama starring a 50-year-old woman who has Alzheimer's. Hollywood is never going to make that movie. People have got to start to learn not to say never to me. and so it's a miracle in a million ways that Julianne Moore is Alice and won the Academy Award. And so why is this so incredibly important? When I was doing the research for this book, I came to know 27 people living with early onset, early stage Alzheimer's, and they shared with me every day for the year and a half I was writing this book what it feels like to live with Alzheimer's. And I recognized pretty early on that not only was I writing a book in honor of my Nana, I had an opportunity and a responsibility to give a face and a voice to these people who aren't typically included in what gets talked about when we talk about Alzheimer's. The general impression of Alzheimer's for too long has been that this is a disease of the dying elderly. And unfortunately, that's a really easy population to ignore. But what if Alzheimer's looks like Julianne Moore? What if she looks like all of the people that I'd come to know and love who are living with Alzheimer's in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s? Living with Alzheimer's, not end stage, not elderly in a nursing home, and I know that happens and that they're worthy of our respect and attention as well. But what about all the people living with Alzheimer's? What does that sound like, look like, feel like? And so the book and the movie have had an opportunity to drag Alzheimer's out of the closet because we are afraid to talk about it. It makes us uncomfortable. We human beings do not like to be made to feel uncomfortable. And so my neighbor who has Alzheimer's, I'd rather not talk about that because that makes me feel awkward. And so we all agree not to talk about it. Well, it's awfully hard to cure something that doesn't exist, right? So that's why what you do is so important. So, like Harry was talking about with cancer, 40, 50 years ago, no one spoke about cancer. They whispered it. They called it the big C. Right? And then something changed, and people started talking about cancer openly, and we got rid of the shame and the stigma, and we wear the looped ribbons, and we bake casseroles and go for carpools, and we rally around and support our neighbors and families and loved ones with cancer. And it is not a coincidence that that conversation happened, and now we have treatments and cancer survivors. We saw the same thing with HIV, where it was first ignored and shame and stigma attached to the group, the gay population who has HIV, but we can ignore that. But then so much changed, and the gay population came out of the closet, and they're people, and we can begin to talk about it, and then there are treatments, and then there's survivors. We're going to see the same thing with Alzheimer's. I'm so proud. The book and now this film have played a role in bringing Alzheimer's into the popular conversation now, where people can go to the movie and recognize some of their experience and what they're seeing, and be able to say to the person sitting next to them in the theater, or their neighbor, or their loved ones, hey, I'm going through that too, how about you? And so before coming here tonight, I have to say I felt a little funny about the idea of receiving an award. It felt a little like, well, why would, I have 3 kids, I have a busy life at home, I don't need the attention, so oh, why do something like this? So I put a lot of thought into it, and I'm so incredibly honored. And what I've come to sort of understand is, and what I want to sort of explain to you, share with you, is that I love the idea that it's a giving acknowledgement that one person can make a difference. So I had a Nana who had Alzheimer's. I loved her so much. And I wrote a book that became a movie, and it's changing the world. And so I just want to end by thanking all of you, because you are all here making a difference in changing the world. Each and every one of you are playing an important role, so thank you for all that you're doing to contribute. Every single voice matters. Raise it loud, be heard. Thank you.